unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hello and welcome and happy Friday. I hope you're having a great start to the weekend. My parents are in town, and so my update from my cat is my kitty Tomato and my mom, who hates cats, got along great. Tonight's show, cows and livestock produced methane. No, it's not through tooting like you think. It's actually through burping, so gross but not as gross. And we consume so many animal products that the methane produced by cows and such contribute to a significant fraction of all our greenhouse gas emissions. What if I told you if you just mixed in a little seaweed into cows' diet, you could reduce their methane emissions by a sizable chunk? Well, scientists are on the brink of a discovery like this. A little red seaweed could help with the amount of methane we release in the atmosphere. It's an amazing breakthrough, but will we be eating cows that are fed this stuff soon? That we'll find out with a scientist working on the project in about 10 minutes. Then, do you pace around like a weirdo when you're on a phone call, almost not engaging with vision at all? If you hop on the horn, are you suddenly pacing laps around the kitchen like you're training for a marathon? Well, there's psychology behind that. It's not just you being antsy. Does that movement help us think, communicate, even calm down? That we'll cover halfway through the hour. We got a great lineup. Let's jump in.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
If you've ever accidentally thrown something out valuable, your passport, your phone, maybe your dignity on a date, listen up. Take heart. The Dutch have one-upped you. A small town in the Netherlands called Maashorst might have thrown away an actual priceless, or at least very expensive, Andy Warhol. That's right, Warhol, the pop art guy, the one who turned soup cans and Marilyn Monroe into high art, and Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands into curbside recycling. The Dutch town, Maashorst's town hall, was undergoing renovation last year. And somewhere between moving chairs and losing track of actual priceless art, a Warhol silkscreen of Queen Beatrix likely got tossed out to the trash. That's what officials are saying. Oh, along with 45 other pieces of art, which is fine, I guess, if you're cleaning out your garage, but less fine if you're the government and the garage is a town hall with a basement full of 20th century masterpieces. Now, the mayor of the town says, and I quote, "This is not how you treat your valuable items," which are bold words for a man whose building apparently doesn't have a filing cabinet or a post-it note that says, "Don't throw out the Warhol." When renovating, no one had policies, procedures, or even a sticker system to keep track of valuables. I've seen more structured snack drawers. Their entire art collection was just shoved in the basement like it was leftover IKEA parts, and some of it even got water damage before it then got sanitation enhanced. I know IKEA is Swedish, not Dutch. To be clear, this isn't like misplacing your cousin's finger painting. This is a piece of Warhol's 1985 Reigning Queen series, which I personally love. That's the series where he turned actual monarchs like Queen Elizabeth II, Beatrix, the Queen of Denmark, the Queen of Swaziland, into psychedelic postage stamp pop divas. Now, the Queen Beatrix piece, may it forever reign in neon, is probably decomposing next to banana peels and a broken printer, which might make it an even more priceless Warhol, but that's besides the point. It just got thrown out. I mean, this is so stupid and useless and a waste of priceless things. It's like if the Library of Alexandria burned down because someone left the papyrus next to a scented candle. Or maybe just like if the Mona Lisa got wiped off because someone thought it was a smudge on the canvas. It's not just a mistake, it's a historic oopsie. You know, I once accidentally threw out a $5 Best Buy card. It was about 10 years ago. I still think about it once a week. These guys might have been something worth who knows how many $1,000s, and their takeaway is basically, yeah, we regret that. What's next? Oops, we lost the Rembrandt, but saved the stapler? At least Warhol, bless him, and may he rest in peace, had had a sense of humor about garbage. He once said, "An artist is somebody who produces things that people don't need to have." So maybe he'd appreciate the irony here. Or maybe he's just rolling over in his coffin-sized Campbell's soup can. I mean, he wasn't actually buried in one of those, but wouldn't it be amazing if he was? Either way, the Dutch town, Maashorsts, their council says the art is unlikely to ever be recovered. At least that's what they said in Dutch. Another loose translation might be, "We rifled through the dumpster, and now it's Friday, so sorry." Anyway, the takeaway for you here, the next time someone asks you if you've done anything irresponsible lately, just say to them, "Well, at least I didn't throw out a Warhol." If you're out fishing this summer and your line starts tugging just a little too hard, maybe don't get excited right away. Because you might not be reeling in dinner, you might be reeling in a horror movie with gills. Officials across the U.S. are asking people to catch and kill a fish called the northern snakehead, a sharp-toothed invasive species that looks like a snake had sex with a wet nightmare and then taught it to breathe air. Yes, I said that. Breathe air. This fish can breathe air. It can survive outside of the water. It breathes like it's auditioning to be the next evolutionary mistake that learns to walk into your cabin, makes itself a sandwich, and then judges you based on your browser history. These fish aren't just invasive in terms of outcompeting local fish, they outcompete the concept of boundaries. Native fish to North America like bass and bluegill, snakeheads eat those for brunch. Crayfish dessert. Your sense of peace, gone. And here's the kicker. If you catch one, conservation officials recommend you cut its head off. Or for the sensitive types, disembowel it. Which is a phrase only used in Game of Thrones or by me after I eat gas station sushi. This fish is from Asia and somehow ended up in the US in North America. Areas where the fish hasn't spread, like Ontario and Canada, have strict warnings about it coming anywhere near their bodies of water. It entered either through the live fish market trade or because someone once released their exotic pet when they realized it was not, in fact, a quirky conversation piece, but a cold-blooded eco-terrorist. Now they're swimming from Maryland to Missouri to New York like they're on a cursed road trip. Or is it cursed? And yes, when I say New York, I don't mean upstate. I mean New York City. These fish have been seen in Central Park. Which means the only thing scarier than rats right now in Manhattan is the northern snakehead. Could it eat rats, though? Cockroaches? I hope so. Anyway, these fish people, and I'm calling them people because they breathe air, they parent. That's right, they're fiercely protective of their young. They gather their babies into something called a fry ball, which sounds delicious, maybe adorable, but it's actually a pulsating mass of aquatic doom guarded by two angry fish parents who will bite your hook off if you come too close. And it's not just air they breathe that makes them so adaptable and so hard to kill. They can live on ice for days. Catching them isn't enough. You have to kill them on purpose. Because if you just let them go somewhere to flop around on land, that might accidentally gift them to another pond like an unwanted fruitcake from a dinner guest, except this fruitcake, it eats frogs and everything else. But be a little careful. Before you go full Rambo if you catch one of these things, make sure it's not a bowfin. They look similar, but they're native. They aren't trying to colonize wetlands and crawl into your nightmares. So to recap, if you're fishing and catch a long, angry fish that's acting like it knows kung fu and breathes like a toddler with asthma, you might have got a snakehead. Congratulations. Now kill it like you're canceling your gym membership. Fast, cold, and with no regrets. Honestly, between the parenting skills and the air breathing and the territorial aggression, this fish sounds like people I've seen at the mall on Boxing Day weekend. So if you're out there on a peaceful lake and you hear a soft splash followed by a sound of labored breathing, don't panic. But remember, it's probably not your ex. It's probably a fish, a terrifying, head-chopping recommended fish, a northern snakehead. Sweet dreams. After the break, scientists have been adding a little seaweed to cows' diets, and they burp less, so much less that if this seaweed was widely fed to cows, it could reduce humanity's greenhouse gas emissions. So will your next hamburger have a strict diet of vegetarian sushi? Find out up next.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Prepare to have your mind blown as we delve into the complexities of relationships, explore the cutting edge of science, and celebrate the bizarre and beautiful absurdity of the world around us. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Cows aren't just adorable grass munchers. They're also surprisingly powerful methane machines. The common myth is that it's through their, flatulence, but it's through their burps. Turns out it's a problem, and a splash of seaweed in their diet might change that. I'm here with someone who knows about this curious fix. He works on trying to reduce the environmental impact of livestock at the University of California, Davis. His name is Ermias Kebreab. And red seaweed as an additive can reduce livestock emissions by almost 80%. That's what we're here to discuss. Ermias, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. This is exciting for me.
This is such a curious fix. Mix in a little seaweed, which I think we all could do well with. It's a healthy food, in with the cow's diet, and they start burping less methane. How do you even come to discover something like this?
Yeah, so actually the story has its beginnings in Canada, where a farmer, very astute farmer, noticed that the cows that were eating seaweed in the east coast of Canada seemed to do well, and that he contacted some of the scientists around there, and they start looking into different type of seaweed. And so what they found was when they did just a bunch of different type of seaweed and looking at it, what the effect it may have in terms of nutritionally. But what they saw was that there was actually quite a big reduction in methane emissions. So this was done in a lab. In a lab situation, we've seen a lot of reductions of emissions, methane production happening. So we were not sure that this will transfer to real animals. And this researcher from Canada moved to Australia and then had access to a lot of different type of seaweed. Unfortunately, not all seaweed do this. There's certain types of seaweed that would do this. So when he moved there and he did this assay of a lot of different type of seaweed found in the coast of Australia, he found that one of them, which is red seaweed called Asparagopsis taxiformis, seems to almost eradicate methane production when you just put it a little bit of it with a sample of the animal's rumen. So that got us really interested and look at the mechanisms of this, and we understand the bioactive, the why this is happening. So we were very interested, and we could then start working together with Australians, and we asked for a sample. We got some samples, and we were able to replicate what they've done in their lab, in our lab as well. But then we wanted to move ahead and see if this actually works in real cows.
Yeah, well, let's take one quick step back there. We're all told that cows are bad greenhouse gas emitters. We're told that excessive beef consumption isn't great for the environment. How bad is the problem really?
So if you look at the methane in general, man-made methane, about 30% or so is from livestock. So that's from beef production, from dairy production.
Wow.
But if you look at in general, like if you look at the whole greenhouse gas emission, then it will probably be around 13-14% is from livestock globally. But from the US and in Canada, it's about 5% is from livestock and 10% from whole of agriculture. So plant and animal agriculture, 10%, and from livestock, it's about 5%. So it's a less in US and Canada, but it's much bigger problem around the world.
So is the solution just a little bit of seaweed, a specific seaweed? Could this be like a really exciting major shift? Is it cheap to do? Like, how soon will I be potentially eating cows that have consumed this seaweed and produce less methane throughout their lives?
Well, I can tell you one of the things that are absolutely sure about, which is the efficacy. So that it does reduce methane emissions quite a bit. We've seen it in our labs and in our dairy farm here, reducing by 80%. We've done this in a commercial setting in Montana. We've seen anywhere between 10 to 80%. In Australia, the same thing. So there's a lot of data that came out that shows that it's very, very effective. Now, is it cheap? That's a different thing, because this is a specific seaweed. We are still learning to understand how we can propagate, we can produce it in a mass production and make it available as cheaply as possible. But luckily, we have at least 4 or 5 startup companies around the world that are working on this as we speak. So I'm hoping that they will come up with a solution where they are able to produce it in a cheap way, and then they can distribute it, and then we can add just a little bit of the seaweed to help us manage our methane emissions.
So two things. One, as yet, we don't know how to produce it on a mass scale. Doesn't mean we won't be able to, but right now we don't.
Yes.
And then two, can you get it approved as livestock feed? Like, can you just start feeding your livestock whatever, or do government agencies need to say, oh, you can only feed animals this, that, and the other?
Oh, yeah. There's a very, very strict regulation on what he can feed and what he cannot feed. And in California, actually, for about a year or so, it was approved to be fed to animals. The specific product was approved to be fed to animals. But I think they wanted now to make sure that it's all aligned to the federal. So what the startup companies are doing right now are trying to get the permission to feed this from multiple organizations. But they have to do the experiments and they have to do the research to show that this is a safe and effective solution before it can be approved.
In a perfect world where the data is great, it doesn't have any effect on the cow, farming it is economical, and what would you see happen, and what kind of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in terms of livestock would we see?
Well, I think if we are able to show that it has no impact, I would think about between 40 to 50%, I think, realistically, because you don't want to give it too high doses. So it depends. The more you give it, the more it reduces. But just to make sure that there is no unintended consequences, if you go with an average dose of this or inclusion levels, then I would say safely between the 30 to 40% reduction, consistent reduction throughout the life of those animals could happen, which is huge.
It's just so exciting. It's just such a small thing, such a small tweak, and you can really have a lasting impact. Is that an exciting area for you to work on?
Absolutely, yeah. This has been basically my life the last almost 10 years working on specifically on feed additives. So we work not just on seaweed, but a number of other feed additives as well. And what we've seen is that we are coming up with some solutions that will really change the whole game. And we work with other additives. There's one that's approved in Canada and the US and about 60 countries around the world called Bovaer. And that is that solution reduces methane emissions by up to 30%. So we already have one solution that's already approved. But we are looking into more solutions, the different type of solutions using the byproducts. We're even looking into editing microbiomes to effectively eliminate methane. So that's what we're trying to do in the next 5 to 10 years.
That's basically tweaking the bacteria in the cow or the livestock stomach to just tweak what kind of gas they emit while they're digesting food.
Exactly. So methane is actually produced by microbes. It's it's the bacteria fault, it's the microbes fault that this is happening. So you have the methanogens, this is archaea that produce this. So we are targeting specifically those microbes, and if we are able to kind of switch off the genes that are producing this methane, then we may be able to not produce methane at all, or we could do it in a different way where we introduce some more competition for the methanogens, so that there would be utilization of some of the nutrients in the stomach, and then actually the animals become more productive. So because methane is energy, right? So when they belch out methane, it's belching out energy. So if we are able to actually capture that energy and then convert it into milk or meat, then not only are we reducing the impact on the environment, but we're also improving the productivity from those animals.
If these feed additives catch on and the livestock that I consume, their milk, their beef products, whatever, have reduced less methane, do you think we'll start seeing labels on it like burp light or no moo emissions? What would be your ideal label on a beef package?
Yeah, I think those are already available. Now, for example, in Australia, you can have a low carbon milk, a low carbon meat. So these are from animals that were fed this kind of additive. So yeah, your carbon emission, you can have your carbon emission by using those kind of technologies.
Well, Ermias Kebreab is an animal science professor at the University of California, Davis. Ermias, thank you for joining me. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Up next, a psychologist's take on why we pace around when we're taking a phone call. I do this all the time. And I always just thought I was a nutcase. But no, there's a good reason we pace around while we're on the phone, and we'll find that out after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The show that asks the questions other shows are afraid to ask. The Last Show with David Cooper.
I love the topic we're about to jump into. It speaks to something I do, and I think a lot of us do all the time, even without thinking about it. You know when you're on a phone call and suddenly you're pacing laps around the kitchen like you're training for a marathon? Well, it turns out there might be psychology behind that. It's not just about being antsy. So does that movement help us think, communicate, and even calm down? I'm here to discuss that with Dr. Ken Fogel, who's a psychologist at the Chicago School. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Very much appreciate being here.
I never gave it a second thought, but I literally race around my home when I'm on the phone. Or if I'm on the phone in the street and I've got nowhere to go, I go up and down the block, back and forth, back and forth. Why do I do that is the question I want to tackle here. I assume because it's what my mother did and I just observed her do it and I absorbed it, but that may not be the cause.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. It's definitely a cultural thing, because it wasn't that long ago that you wouldn't even be able to do that. I mean, I grew up where the phone was wired to the wall. And if you wanted to pace, you had to bring the whole damn thing with you back and forth, which is not particularly comfortable or easy to do. And then, of course, and then they did make phones that had longer curly cords. But then if you paced and you paced too far, then the phone would jerk you back to the wall. So that also is not conducive to pacing. And then there were the advent of like cordless, where like then there was there's almost like a societal feeling of freedom, like, oh, I don't have to sit on the couch, I can actually walk around. So that's probably where this started. And then of course there's mobile phones, where that kind of brought the whole mess outside, where now you have people just talking out in public. Now, I think that's probably makes more sense for people to be walking and talking because they're called mobile phones. I mean, that kind of goes along with that. But what about indoors? Like, what about pacing indoors, or at least kind of close to being indoors? So last week, I noticed some guy who was pacing back and forth on his phone just outside of Starbucks. Now, in my mind, I'm like, well, maybe he's just hopped up on caffeine. Maybe it has nothing to do with the pacing on the phone thing. I don't know. It was a Starbucks. Now, the thing that I would consider right off the bat is not everyone does this.
No.
So not everyone paces on the phone. So why is it that only some people do? Now, that to me is where we start getting into the psychology piece, because, well, as a psychologist, one of my sworn duties is to make simple things complicated and to make complicated things simple. So let's see if we can kind of like get that going too. All right. So before getting into the nitty gritty, there are several things to consider, and you might want to consider this too as you're kind of reflecting on your own kind of behaviors about this. So first of all, do you pace in other situations besides being on the phone?
I'm literally swiveling back and forth on my chair. I think it helps me disengage with my sense of vision. That's my best explanation for it. I don't want to be seeing when I'm listening closely to something. And so pacing back and forth just creates a blur. And sometimes I'm staring off into the abyss and my girlfriend's like, what are you staring at? I'm like, I don't know what I was looking at. Just like you can kind of tune out with your ears, I can tune out with my eyes. She doesn't have that ability. She can't turn her eyes off. So I guess that's my best explanation. I do it. And I'm trying to really focus in a way.
Yeah. So those are great points, because, and it gets to the pros and cons of this, as well as like the different personalities that you kind of mentioned, the role of attention, the role of what it is you're talking about. But in terms of like the general kind of personality style, if you tend to be somebody who just fidgets, or, the clinical term for that is sitting on spilkas. But I mean, if you do have that, you're more likely to pace while you're on the phone, just because you don't like sitting still for too long. So that is kind of something, and something I'll kind of come back around to a little bit later if I have time. I know that there's a certain member of my family who paces when they're talking, not on the phone. And I can't have a conversation with them because they're dizzying. I mean, I have to look away when they're talking because they walk back and forth. So there's that. So it's not even just on the phone. Okay, so there's do you do it all the time? Then there's the question of when. Do you pace on the phone regardless of when in the day it is. Like if somebody, for example, you get a call that's woken you up from a deep slumber, or if you're coming home from a very intense workout and you're dead tired, do you also pace then? So those are also considerations.
We've got like 100 questions. Are we going to start to answer some of these? Or this is the point of psychologists? Like I'm imagining it being in my shrink's office and he's just like, how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I slipped into therapist mode. Let me kind of back up. All right. So there was the where, there's the what, there's the who. Who are you on the phone with? Are they going to care that you're pacing? That's something to consider. Some people don't, some people do not. Then what is it that you're talking about? And that gets into the question of, does that person need your undivided attention? And that's where the who becomes important too. Because if you're talking to a friend or a parent, might not matter. But if you're talking to a client or a boss or supervisor and you stub your toe or you step on a Lego, sorry, I should have done a trigger warning for that. If it, maybe you'll get distracted by that. You notice a new stain in your carpet. That might have an influence on the relationship that you have there. On the other hand, if it's a really compelling conversation, you won't notice those things and even the blood coming out of your toe because, that's kind of the way that works. So there's that. So all of those are just preliminary stuff. But okay, so in terms of the reasons though, like you mentioned, a big part of it is the visual. What's missing is the visual that you tend to have with a conversation. So when you're talking to somebody, you hear them, you have to imagine them now. You have to imagine their behaviors, their feelings, their responses, their demeanor, which isn't always an issue, but depending on your mood, depending on kind of your own personality style, that might influence kind of what you imagine them reacting. And so that's going to probably make you feel uncomfortable and potentially make you want to move. All right. So there's that piece. But then there's the emotions piece, which involves your body as well as your brain. So if you're moving, you're getting your body moving. So that's going to have more link up between your brain and your body. So there's that. Then there's the physical activity piece. Now, there is something called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. It's a great acronym. So it is possible that you might burn calories while pacing, but I wouldn't use that as like a recommendation for weight loss because you're not going to burn off calories from a donut from a 10-minute conversation. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Does it help us focus? Like, does the pacing help us focus?
That depends on, like I said, some of the factors I mentioned before. What is around you that might be distracting you? If you have internal distractors versus external distractors, if you have internal distractors, it will probably help you focus because you're pacing and therefore you're less kind of just in your own head and therefore in your own mind of memories, thoughts, and feelings, and therefore more likely to pay attention to the conversation if you're pacing. But that only works for some people. Some other people, it's the opposite. Because if you're pacing, and also keep in mind that one would hope that you're pacing in a place that you're familiar with. Because if you are not familiar, then you might bump into something. If you're walking outside, you might bump into somebody else. You might walk out into traffic. Probably not a good recommendation.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this stream of consciousness odyssey that opened more questions than it gave answers. But I do feel like I learned something, which is the odd part about it, Ken.
Awesome. That's all I can do. I am more of a teacher than a psychologist, but there you go. So to wrap things up, it's all about individual variability. Everyone's going to be different. And I would say just to be curious about yourself in this.
All right. Well, Ken, thanks so much for your time. This was a lot of fun. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks very much for having me.
Dr. Ken Fogel is a psychologist at the Chicago School. Coming up in a few moments, an ancient fingerprint from Stonehenge changes everything we know about its origins. And by fingerprint, I mean the fingerprint of a rock. Well, stones in the ancient structure came from a place far away from where we thought. What mysteries could this slab of rock unlock? Ooh, that sounds good. Slab of rock unlock. We'll find out after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Broadcasting intimate details and useless information from an undisclosed location in New York City. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Stonehenge, where the demons dwell, where the banshees live, and they do live well. The site just got a plot twist. A new study says that the altar stone in Stonehenge didn't come from Wales like we thought, but instead hundreds of miles, hundreds of kilometers away in Scotland, which raises questions. How did it get there? That's just one question. But here, questions will be questioned and answers will be answered. Here with Noah Cappe, it's Noah versus the unknown. Noah is an expert in the ancient and the unknown. Noah, welcome.
Hey, buddy.
How's that for an ad-libbed introduction?
I was literally about to say, I know what we're talking about, but I just got fired up. I was like, holy moly, I can't wait to hear this.
Questions will be questioned. Answers will be answered here on the smartest, stupidest, ancient discussion anyone's ever had.
And maybe not in that order.
Yeah, you're the smart one in case it's not clear.
Oh, is that right? Oh, we're in trouble.
Stonehenge.
This is a fun one today, man. Yeah.
Is there anything more fun to think of than Stonehenge? There are people that have done experiments. How could they got the rocks up like that? I think using pulleys, using this, that, and the other. They don't quite know. I don't think people have resolved on it was impossible for an ancient civilization to put those stones up. But at the same time, for the rocks to come from hundreds of kilometers away, this is new.
Stonehenge is obviously one of those iconic sites. It's when you're a kid, there's like a handful. It's the pyramids, Stonehenge. I mean, there's like Machu Picchu. There's like a couple of spots that are just iconic. And I think Stonehenge is iconic, not for the reasons like the pyramids about how did they do it. It's like we can maybe wrap our heads around how you transport a 4-ton stone 700 kilometers or 400 miles. It's like, okay, we'll say we can figure out, wet the sand, pull it along. It'll take a year, whatever. But it's more about what this place could have been, what it might have represented, and what it might have been used for, which I think is the real mystery here. Not how did it get built, but what was this thing being used for? Because these stones are big. There is clearly an intentional, intricate, interesting design here. What was going on? And there's some wacky theories.
Was it a burial place? Was it a meeting place? Was it some sort of astronomical sundial computer time clock, time zone, seasonal decoder? Did I say that right?
That's it.
What were the Druids doing? Was it built by Druids? We got to know. I don't know, but we got to know.
You get all the theories on this one, right? I mean, as always, the classic go-to scientific starting point of a religious site. It's always a religious site. And to me, it's like, there is too many things leaning towards a different theory. And I would go with the astronomical alignments. The solstices, everything we know about the ancients, the Mayans, all of these cultures, the stars, the sun, the summer and winter solstice, these were the like foundational pieces of these civilizations. They were what they followed, tracked, and really based everything around. If you don't have a clock and you need to know what's going to happen with seasons, when to, prepare for whatever, it's the stars, it's the sun. And I think this place was an unbelievably elaborate astronomical device.
Stone 80, as scholars say. It's also called the altar stone. It's a stone in the ground, varying accounts of what it may have been used for. But we just got some new information about it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the stones are massive, and for very quickly, Stonehenge is much bigger than people realize. Everybody focuses on the existing stones that are still in that kind of like circle shape, but there was additional circles around that circle. There is a much larger circle that goes way around the perimeter of the whole site. They found dozens and dozens of like wooden posts that were spaced out. So again, when you see what this place looked like when all of the wood and all of the pieces were in place, it's a very elaborate setup. But this altar stone is the big stone right in the center. It's the key point. If it's a religious theory, it's where the ceremonies were happening. If it's a portal, it's where the aliens were landing. I mean, this is the centerpiece.
Stargate, baby. There's one under the pyramids and there's one at Stonehenge.
This is a theory, right? That it was that it's a portal, that it's some kind of dimensional gateway. But this altar stone, as it turns out, is not from England. It's actually 700 kilometers, 400 miles away from Scotland. So again, one of these things, why? Why that stone, and why the choice to move it that distance in 2500 BC?
But that's the great question. And also, if it was brought from there, what does that say about the Druids and the people who built it?
What were their capabilities? What were the reasons? Is that stone couldn't have been found closer or thing? I mean, so then you start to get into the interesting properties of stones and how different stones can conduct energy or even store and hold information. There's a lot of theories that we're going to get to a point eventually where we are able to store information in stone, and that maybe an ancient civilization was able to do that, and we're going to actually be able to pull information out of these existing stones.
So if it came from that far away, if testing pointed that it was that far away, how did they get it there? Like, did they have carts? Did they put it on boats? Was boat capabilities of early civilizations better than we thought? Like, what are some of the ways it could have been dragged across the land or taken across water?
Yeah, I mean, we're in that time window again of like the wheel apparently is invented around 3500 BC, maybe 4000. You don't have a spoked wheel that could move that distance until 2000, 2500 BC. So again, this site is sitting right in there where if there was a wheel, it was probably made of stone and enormous and heavy AF and very difficult to move. They didn't have a wooden spoked wheel yet for sure yet. So again, how do you move it? What are you dragging it? Are you manpower? They had 100 people. 100 people for how many months? And it wasn't like a flat line. It's not like they're dragging it down Main Street.
Look, as my mother would say, it's a schlep to get a stone from Wales to the south of England.
I mean, a schlep.
They didn't have stones they could use over there? Like, why they got to go all the way for this one special stone?
It has to be the properties. It has to be the stone, what it's made of, and what they were using it for. There's no other. You can cut the shape. You can, find the color of a stone. I mean, it has to be the stone's properties. It's really the only explanation.
It also suggests like collaboration across England, like or the Britain. It suggests things that like we weren't aware of until now.
Yeah, and there are multiple Stonehenge type sites, all scattered all around England and the UK. There are lots of these circular sites, or whatever. Even now in the Amazon, as they start to use LiDAR. I don't know if people have seen what they're discovering in the Amazon, which is going back so far. We're talking about hundreds, we're talking about thousands of structures of shaped places to keep animals, people, whatever it is. So there's as always a lot of unknowns. But we answered a couple today.
I would say so. So astronomical site is your leading theory on what Stonehenge was used for?
I think so. I mean, as always, there's the part of me that loves to believe that there's going to be some glowing light and a spinning wheel's going to open up a portal and we're all going to, slide through that big spinning tube. But I think at the end of the day, it seems too elaborate and too much for just a religious kind of site or component. And look, when the winter solstice comes and the summer solstice comes, the sun is blowing through exact stone alignments and hitting specific spots. It's too coincidental.
Well, Noah Cappe is a TV host with a passion for the unknown. It's Noah versus the unknown. Answers answered, questions questioned. Noah, what a pleasure it was to have you on the show today.
We did our job, my friend.
After the break, it's sexual health. We'll tackle the question, what your deepest, darkest fantasy says about you. Something you might not even tell a partner, something you might not ever act on. What are some of the more out there fantasies people have? We'll cover that in a moment.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
Over Over the next 10 minutes, we'll discuss adult themes with a sexual health communicator. We'll discuss sexuality, and it will contain sexual language. So, content warning, sensitive listeners or parents with kids do be advised.
This is your nightly dose of chaos, confession, and questionable life choices. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Doing it in a park, on a beach, or in a changing room. It's a fantasy for some people, but for many, the risk of being caught and actually getting in legal trouble is not something they want to do. Today, we're going to discuss fantasies that we may not act out on. Here with Samantha Bitty on Sex, Etc. Samantha Bitty's a sexual health and consent educator. Samantha, welcome in. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
I love this topic because I think a lot of us have fantasies that they would never act out on. Maybe it's like sleeping with a friend. Maybe it's role playing. Maybe it's I don't even know. But I do think a lot of us have sexual fantasies that like are a part of us. And when we're fantasizing and having adult alone time with ourselves, it's all fun and games to think about. But like we would never act out on them. And that's what I want to talk to you about today.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really great topic too.
What are some that come to mind for you?
I think that these fantasies, or that fantasies in general, exist on a spectrum from like pretty vanilla to completely absurd, out of the realm of even possibility, right? So on the kind of vanilla end of the spectrum, it might be things like cheating or being cucked, or just something that, sex that is involving genders that you wouldn't normally be, like if I'm straight, I'm not straight, but if someone was straight and then they're like really into gay sex porn or whatever, right? So that to me is kind of on the vanilla end of the spectrum, all the way to like, I'm a dragon and I'm rescuing a princess and I'm like f***ing her in the castle and whatever. It's like, yeah, like you're never going to be a dragon, but it like really turns you on.
Are you saying aliens aren't real and I can't sleep with them? I don't know. The truth is out there. The cheating one's interesting to me because it's like, oh, I want my partner to be so desirable by someone else, or I want to feel the emotions of having my partner stolen. It's so sexy, but in reality, like, okay, I don't want to be cheated on. I think that's a common one.
I also think there is, on the other side of it, of the desire to cheat is, the emotion of, I can't help myself. I'm risking everything. I love my partner and our family and everything that we have together. But, this person has like seduced me and I'm helpless like that, I think too. And I think it points to what it is that fantasies tell us, right? Like that it's not necessarily that I want to have sex with a clown. It is the emotion that it evokes. And that's the part that is, I think, that gets played in, that we don't necessarily need to live out these things in our day-to-day IRL lives. Maybe we do, but that a fantasy isn't necessarily something to be afraid of. And I think that that's kind of the thing that I get from people of, that panic of like, oh, am I a sicko? Like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, it's that if I fantasize about something, doesn't mean it has to be a core part of my identity and doesn't mean I have to act on it. And the answer is no.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And like, not to be too like Jungian about it, but I think that oftentimes these particular or specific fantasies can just be placeholders for, again, an emotion that we want to experience, or a trauma we want to work through, and this kind of desire that I think is innate in human beings to meaning make, right? And so, some fantasies might point to the fact that you're a sicko. Like that is also very possible. But I would say that anybody who feels panicked or worried about a fantasy that they have, if they really want to investigate deeper, they can kind of explore, well, what is the emotion connected to this? What is it that I'm trying to work through or experience? And you might find that you have a bit more grace and generosity with yourself around it. The same way that like people fantasize about having sex with certain friends, right? Where it's like, I don't actually want to have sex with that friend,
Especially like if they're in a committed relationship or they're not, their sexuality isn't oriented towards someone, but you still want to do it. It's okay.
Yeah. Or it's because they're in a committed, or like whatever it is, without disclosing anything about myself. I think that it's like, oh, okay. Like you can either just enjoy it for what it is, the ways that we watch certain television or movies. And it's like, oh yeah, this is just a good time. Like this is just, I don't have to explore and investigate, and I can suspend reality and enjoy this. Or you can investigate deeper and reflect on, oh, what is the need here that is being fulfilled by this? But I also believe in just letting yourself be feral in your own mind.
Yes, you mentioned you may find that you're a sicko with some of your fantasies, and I love that because some people's may be out there and maybe involving octopuses or octopods or octopi, but I don't really believe in thought crime. I think it's more like how you act. So I don't really care what people think so much. It's their actions, what they say, what they do. If you want to fantasize about some stuff that would be shocking to find out at the dinner table on your Sunday roast or whatever, I don't know why I chose Sunday roast. That doesn't bother me. It's more like, oh, do you act on it?
Do you think, or like in your experience, if you were involved with someone and they, you're talking about fantasies and they've like trusted you enough to tell you something that like really sicks you out, where do you reside with that? Like, does it change the way you view the person? Like, what are your feelings about that?
That's such an interesting one because I see posts online about couples. I saw one the other day. The woman's like, my husband's straight, and he revealed his fantasy to me, and he says he doesn't have to act on it, and we don't need to do any sexual play associated with it, but he loves wearing women's clothes and women's underwear. And she's like, I'm trying to be open-minded about this, but it's making me see him and our sex in a whole new light. Like, what do I do? Like, I don't want to be kind of get the ick, but here I am with it. I can't really control it. That's such an interesting one. You want to have a culture with your partner where you can share anything, even if it means you won't act on it. But there's that worry that you disclose something that to your partner is so out there. Like, I don't think men wearing women's clothes is that out there, but to the partner it was. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is there. And I think a lot of people live in fear. They don't want to disclose these things. And in many cases, if they disclose them, the partner and them could have better sex. But there is always that risk, right? Like, I don't know what the answer is here.
I really think it depends on what the thing is. In that situation, I would invite that person to investigate their internalized, probably homophobia,
sure,
or transphobia, or just their assumption about gender and expression, as well as, again, like thinking about it in a deep way. Like, what do our sexual desires say about us as people? Do they say anything? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Like, I definitely have had, because people are very comfortable with me. A lot of lovers that I've had feel very open and safe to talk about a lot of things they might not with a partner who isn't like a relationship and sex expert or educate, whatever. They know that I have the capacity to be like, I'm not going to overthink too much, or at least they think that. And so partners have disclosed some wild to me, like things where
Can you say what or no?
I mean, that's a whole other however long segment, David. We can get into the thick of it another time, but things where I might be taken aback a little bit, just because I am also just like a flawed human woman, where I'm like, oh, so like you're into that, huh? Okay, like, and I can know that has nothing to do with me, and they're not trying to play that out with me.
Yeah, you want to challenge your assumptions and see where this negativity is coming from. But at the end of the day, we're all flawed. We all have our biases. I don't know what you do.
Mm-hmm. My approach is compartmentalization.
It's a good one. You can find Samantha Bitty on the podcast app. Look up What Would Samantha Bitty Do? It's her new show, and it's fantastic. Samantha Bitty's a sexual health and consent educator. Samantha, oh, what a pleasure.
Thank you.
Ever get a nostalgic feeling listening to music? Why does it happen? Up next, the brain science behind that.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. broadcasting relationship truths and scientific discoveries with a comedian's touch. The Last Show with David Cooper.
When I hear good music that makes me nostalgic, music that I used to enjoy years ago, or maybe it's a song associated with an ex, I get that weird, indescribable mood. It's hard to explain until now, because neuroscientists have scanned people's brains while tuning into vibing music. I'm here with cognitive neuroscientist from the University of Southern California, Dr. Sarah Hennessy, to talk what happens to our brain when we listen to nostalgic music. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, glad to be here.
First things first, is it nostalgic or nostalgic? I never know. I guess it depends on your accent, doesn't it?
I think it does. I say nostalgic, but, I think they're both right.
I'll switch to that. What makes music like that so powerful? Like, I think we all know intuitively, well, most of us, some people don't like music. We'll put those people aside for a second. We all know intuitively that music can make us feel a certain way, and music can put us in that nostalgic mood where we long for things past. But what makes it so powerful in our brain, and why investigate that in the first place?
Music that is nostalgic to us is connected to autobiographical memories. So it's connected to memories of our past. So it usually happens as you listen to a piece of music when, maybe you're a teenager at a high school graduation, and that song becomes sort of encoded as like a marker for this memory for the rest of your life. And over time, that can kind of keep evoking this memory and keep evoking some of these like pleasurable feelings of maybe being back there. So that's sort of the idea behind nostalgic music in general. But I was really interested in, what is happening in our brains when we listen to this type of music? Is it just like listening to any piece of music? Is there something actually special about music that is nostalgic, that is separate from music that is just familiar to us?
I'm so curious about what happens to our brain from like a neuroscience perspective. So what do? You just hook people up to a bunch of electrodes and start playing music for them? How do you test this out? How do you go about these experiments?
Yeah, sort of. So we use a neuroimaging method called functional magnetic resonance imaging. And it's basically a giant magnet. And we put people into this fMRI scanner. And then we play them a whole bunch of songs. And for this study, we played them songs that they had identified as nostalgic. Those were their nostalgic songs. And then we also played them a bunch of songs that were not nostalgic, but that they still knew. And these songs were also sort of musically very similar to their nostalgic songs. We kind of searched the whole Spotify library and found these kind of musically matched songs. And so in the end, when we look at the brain activity, we're really just looking at the nostalgic response. So basically then when they're in the scanner, we conduct a functional scan, and we can look at where in the brain their blood is flowing, essentially. And then we interpret that as activation in the brain. And so what we saw here is that when people were listening to nostalgic music, these personalized pieces of music that brought back these like key moments in time in their lives, when they were listening to those pieces of music, we saw activation in these two key networks of the brain.
And what do those networks represent?
So the first network is called the default mode network, which is sort of a misleading name. It used to be associated with kind of just doing nothing. So it was what we realized was happening in the brain when we were at rest. And so we called it the default mode network. But now we know that it's also related to, when we think about ourselves, when we remember personal experiences, when we reflect back on our life story narrative. And then the second network that was activated was our reward network. And this is a very deep network within the brain. And it's made up of areas that respond to things that we find enjoyable, like food or sex.
This is amazing to me. So you've kind of quantified this feeling, this indescribable feeling, one like self-reflection and one reward, and the two play with each other, and that's kind of what we're experiencing.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you find an effect with age? Because I went to summer camp when I was 13, and I came home, and I was in the car, and that Neil Young tune, Old Man, was playing. And I told my dad, wow, the summer really flew by. It was like, 6-7 weeks? And I guess my dad was in his late 50s at the time, early 60s. I don't know. It was 25 years ago. He's 75. He was 50. And he said, "You think that went by quickly? Wait till you see how quickly life goes by." And I didn't think anything of it. And now every time I hear that Neil Young song, I get that memory triggers, and it gets more and more emotional as I age. I guess from this personal anecdote, my question is, does it affect people differently as they age?
A great question. That's something I'm really interested in. So we had a group of younger adults and a group of older adults. And so we were comparing how these two age groups would respond differently to this nostalgic music in the fMRI scanner. And we actually observed that older adults had slightly stronger activation in these nostalgia-related regions and networks than younger adults. And I had actually expected them to be relatively similar. I didn't really expect there to be more or less activation. So that was kind of exciting and unexpected.
Did you look at folks with dementia or memory loss? Did you look at scanning their brains when they heard nostalgic music, maybe as a way to trigger memories that they were having trouble recalling?
We didn't in this particular study, but that is a direction that this research is headed. So, there are all these anecdotal accounts of older adults with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias who otherwise have pretty profound memory loss, right? And for some individuals, if you play them a piece of music from their adolescence frequently, for that duration that the song is playing, they have this sort of return to self, and they might be able to remember the words of a song or who's standing in front of them or kind of who they were in that moment. And that's really what motivated this research in the first place. So while this study didn't examine folks with Alzheimer's disease or related dementias, that's our next step in this research, is to look at folks with neurodegeneration like that and see, are they still responding neurally in the way that healthy folks are?
Do you think there's a future where we could use music as a kind of therapeutic thing for people with memory loss?
Yeah, it's already happening, for one thing. We just don't really understand, how and why it works or may not work in some folks. So it's still a relatively new area. But yeah, that's the goal, right? The goal is to see if this could be a effective therapeutic mechanism and why. Importantly, none of this research is aiming to show that, this nostalgic music is going to reverse Alzheimer's disease or really bring back memory long term. But the goal is, maybe we can increase quality of life by helping people engage with, who they were, who they are for short periods of time.
I think that's important to add, and thank you for doing that. Fun stuff here. Did you see any songs or patterns when doing these trials amongst your participants that surprised you, or were there any common nostalgic themes in the music?
I think the coolest thing about the music choice is that everyone's choice is so different. You can have a 22-year-old with, death metal as their nostalgic songs, and then somebody else with all Mozart, right? And the neural regions are essentially the same of what is activated with nostalgic music. So, it's not really about the type of music, the genre, it's the feeling that it elicits.
I love that. You can have a jarring clash between two genres, between two different people, but the way it affects their brain is similar.
Yeah, exactly, which is pretty amazing. We did have some common themes with artists and music, certainly because we were looking within kind of specific age groups. So, Taylor Swift is, the top nostalgic music artist for both millennials and Gen Z. And then the Beatles and the Temptations are really big for both boomers and Gen X. So two artists that are, going across generations.
Well, Sarah, thanks for sharing your research with me. This is really interesting. I've enjoyed our chat.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Dr. Sarah Hennessy is a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Southern California. People always say that social media makes us lonelier and we should limit our time with it. But why? Can short-form videos trap us in a cycle of loneliness, whether we post them or just watch them? Answers to that question up next.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The The Last Show with David Cooper, where we apply quantum mechanical psychoanalytical astrotherapy to your problems.
At first, social media promised us connection. But are we just scrolling through our own loneliness? Well, a new study says it's not just people who post excessively, but people who lurk on social media platforms. You know, scrolling but never sharing, who mostly feel bad. So is Instagram ruining our mental health? Or something deeper going on? We'll discuss with James Roberts. He's a marketing professor at Baylor University who researched this. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, David.
So I think this is a big topic. A lot of people spew out anecdotes and maybe not the best advice about the impact of social media on mental health, on feeling lonely. You decided to study it, though. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I have had a long history of looking at how technology impacts our well-being. So I've looked at technology from smartphone addiction to social media addiction, and looking at how does it impact us both physically and mentally.
So you look at passive and active social media use in your recent paper. Can you break down the difference between the two? It seems like it's a very different personality type who's always sharing photos of their coffee, and then those who are just kind of laying in bed at night looking at what their friends are doing but never posting.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, not to give away all my good stuff before this early on in our talk, but yeah, active and passive social media. It's really a fundamental different use of social media. What we like to think is that active social media, which is simply posting, commenting, liking, interacting, that was really kind of originally the game plan for social media, that we'd be out there interacting with people and that would just kind of increase our social sphere and we'd be happy. And well, the story is a little more complicated than that, but that's active social media. But actually, the way most of us, and I'm going to say about 80% of social media use is what we call passive. And so your listeners would say and would understand that as just kind of scrolling through and again, you can enjoy things. I mean, I study these areas, and so I also use these social media apps, and I get some enjoyment out of TikTok. I hate to admit that, but it's always in isolation, and I'm separated from people, and so that passive use where you're not interacting with people is the predominant use. And so here's the really kind of downside of all that. Our literature, I've been studying both technology and well-being and social media and well-being for 10 to 15 years. And there's been some dramatic changes we can get into maybe later about short-form video and TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts as really just kind of the stepchild or the Frankenstein that we've created out of the kind of the innocent beginnings with Facebook. But what I was going to mention too was that the literature, the careful studies that have been done have largely felt that active social media use, good, right? Interacting, posting, liking, and passive, bad, right? You're just watching and kind of doom scrolling and seeing things at, parties and friends that are doing things without us, that old fear of missing out. We all can well understand that. So the problem and what we found, and again, I think what adds some kind of gravitas to what we're talking about today was this study that we're talking about from my paper with colleagues, was that we looked at about 7,000 adults over 9 years. So this wasn't like, let's get a couple college students together and ask them what they think about passive and active social media use and see what they say. This was a very careful study. Some of the statistics are, to be honest, were almost beyond me. I had a colleague who has a PhD in statistics who was helping us with this. But the real come down of all this was that whether you use your social media actively or passively, it increased over time, increased your levels of loneliness.
This seems to poke a hole in the whole I use social media to stay in touch with people argument. Should we be concerned about how we justify our screen time based on what you've researched?
Very concerned.
Oh boy.
And really my understanding was, I knew it was a loose connection, but that, active has got to be better than passive. But what we're really finding, it's not active versus passive, but it's active and passive versus face-to-face interaction.
A vicious cycle, you found, a negative feedback loop. Lonely people turn to social media. They're either active or passive. That in turn makes them more lonely, which might make them inclined to approach social media to try to feel connected, making them more lonely. Is this something you observed? Is this something we should be worried about?
Yeah, well, David, you sound like you should be a co-author on the paper. But
that presupposes I'm a lot smarter than I am. But please keep going.
But yeah, no, you're right. In research parlance, we call it the bidirectional relationship. And that simply means a very fancy way of saying, yeah, using social media, whether it's active or passive, leads to loneliness. But what we found is that also, like you mentioned, that lonely people turn to social media when they're feeling lonely and left out. And the sad part of that, of course, is they're looking for some nurture, for some community. And what we're finding out is they're not really finding us.
It used to just be photos, maybe messages that were 140 characters or less. Then it was the like button. It was comments. Gradually, we sort of developed this. Now we're in the current generation, and you mentioned it earlier, short form videos, Instagram Reels, TikTok videos, YouTube Shorts. Are these particularly bad for us? You said earlier you wanted to talk more about it. I am curious.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that they are the next, they've been around for a bit now, but they are the newest generation of, newest generation of social media. And they're a level and propensity to create addictive behavior, is like night and day. It's like Facebook. I pine for the days of Facebook or maybe even just Instagram before they added Reels. Like you said, we showed pictures, we interacted with each other. But now the sole job of short form video platforms like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts is to keep people on that platform as long as possible. And again, when we consume, we use that word in consumer behavior research. When we consume short form videos, we're doing it in private. So we're seeing things that maybe where we're left out, we're entertained, but we don't get much interaction with people. And so, the propensity, again, this is not by happenstance that we're more likely to be addicted to TikTok than we would be to Facebook. It is by design.
These platforms are heavily marketed towards young people. I feel like TikTok is a part of the zeitgeist for Gen Z. Are you concerned that these platforms are heavily marketed towards young folks? They're growing up having never not had them, and yet these negative effects are there?
Oh, yeah. You touched on a sensitive subject with me because I do research in this area, but I'm also a teacher. And so I work with young people, they're either my students or I work and I'm around young people, love young people. But what I've found is the kind of pernicious nature of short form video and I'm focusing on that because that's really the vast majority of what we now refer to as social media use is short form video. And so it's so addictive and we get addicted to the idea of fast reward response. 10, 15-second video, we get a little laugh, we see something that's titillating or funny, and we go on to another one, and we go on to another one. And what people don't realize is that these younger generations and have been raised on this kind of dopamine rush that we get every 30 seconds from these short form videos. And people say, well, that's not good, but they can put them down. Well, no, they can't. They're really addicted. There was a great study that came, not a study actually, from some court case. Some documents came out from a court case where they subpoenaed TikTok's own records. And their own records said that it took about 500 views, which is not very long on TikTok, before you become addicted. And so that's coming from TikTok.
What would you like social media platforms to do? They're not going away. Maybe some sort of like warning label or kicking people off after a certain amount of time and saying go outside. Is there any changes that could be done right now to address this?
Yeah, you'd like to think there was, but really the goal is to keep people there as long as possible. So it would really be akin to shooting themselves in the foot if they try to discourage the use. It's going to take either government intervention or some kind of just total reverse because we're addicted and it's going to be a hard addiction to break.
Jim, I've appreciated the chat. Thanks for your time.
Oh, you bet. I enjoyed it, David. Have a great day.
James Roberts is a marketing professor at Baylor University. After the break, we'll zoom back in time and look at Niagara Falls, the mist, the mystery, and the times the falls stopped running. People panicked, and we'll learn more about it in a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. We're here because your heightened awareness deserves heightened entertainment. The Last Show with David Cooper.
You've all heard of Niagara Falls. At least 1 gallon of water flows over it every hour. Probably more. It's a natural wonder, a waterfall that sits smack dab on the border between U.S. and Canada. But the gushing stream of water that flows over it once ran dry. Twice, in fact, and each time it was unforgettable. We're here to discuss with Craig Baird, the host of Canadian History X, a podcast. He joins us from Edmonton, just outside of Edmonton, Alberta. Craig, welcome.
No, thanks for having me.
All right. The idea of Niagara Falls running dry is insane to me because I visited as a kid and I took that ferry underneath it, made of the mist or made in the mist or made by the mist, whatever it is. So much water flows over that thing every day. It must have been an amazing sight when it first ran dry.
It was. I mean, when you think about it, like you said, this waterfall is producing this huge amount of water. I think it's about 6,000 cubic meters of water every second is going over the falls. So obviously that's creating this massive roar. And if you live in Niagara Falls, you start to get used to that. You know, it's like you have a fan on in your room and then you just get used to it and then you can't sleep without it. So all these people that are living in the Niagara Falls area are so used to that constant roar, the constant sound, that when it suddenly stops, everybody kind of wakes up because that sound you're used to for so long is just, it's poof, it's gone. And it's just this eerie silence kind of over the whole area. And this happened in 1848. So you didn't have like car sounds or any of these other sounds we're used to. It was just an empty silence. And for me, it would feel like if I'd be, I don't know, freaked out a little bit because it'd be like, everything is like, is time frozen? What happened? Like everything is so quiet at this point.
I think some people thought it was the end of the world, like this is where we're at in 1948. The rumble stops, the falls stop, people go look at it and they're like, where's the water? What happened? Can you paint a picture for me, the mechanics behind the stoppage? At least the first one we'll talk about in 1848.
Yeah, so like with this one, like you said, people really did think that this was like a sign of the end times or something because the idea that all of that water would just suddenly stop, there was no dams, there was nothing that would have actually stopped that. They didn't have the capabilities to even do that at that point. But what had actually happened was there was a very strong southwest wind and it drove a huge amount of ice to the head of the Niagara River. And that actually dammed the river and then dried the falls. So it was a relatively quick process. And it's, after you would start to see the falls starting to get less and less and less, and then just a trickle, and then it just stopped. So by the time everybody got out there, they just saw this huge cliff, maybe a little bit of water trickling down, but just no roaring falls around them. And it was just because of this ice dam. So obviously that's something that's probably happened thousands of times over the course of the past, few thousand years. But this was the first where it was actually documented and we can actually see how people reacted and what they did when they saw that, hey, the falls aren't there and, let's go check this out.
Knowing that it was ice that could be dislodged and the river could flow again, the idea of walking out on the dry riverbed is insane to me, but some people did it and they found these like artifacts. I love this detail. They found muskets from the War of 1812, which sounds like it was forever ago, but I guess it was only like 28 years prior to that.
Yeah, some of the people who probably walked on the riverbed and at the top of the falls probably, they probably actually were veterans of the War of 1812. But yeah, like you said, they found tomahawks and bayonets and swords and muskets. On the United States side, the United States Army Cavalry actually paraded back and forth on the river to the delight of everybody who was watching. But I'm kind of like, I'm with you, like, you don't know when that dam's going to break and that wall of water is going to come rushing in. And you better be quick to get out there. But people also were like grabbing fish that were left without water.
Delicious.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's free food, so why not? And they're picking up souvenirs and all these other things that were left behind, but kind of related to what you said. While some people were checking out the falls and looking and seeing what they could find and just enjoying it, the churches were crammed with people because they were freaked out by what had just happened because they had no idea that upriver an ice dam had prevented the water from continuing down, at least at first. Obviously, they figured out later on. But it would have just been such a surreal experience. And I mean, I feel like even with the danger, I would want to go out and just see what I could find and, check out, maybe I can find a musket or something like that, or who knows what is under there. And I really wish we had pictures.
Free fish, free muskets. Sounds like a good deal.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything's free. Just grab it and just hope that dam doesn't break.
And it's 36 years after the War of 1812. So that's what happened then. In 1969, the story was completely different. This was a man-led effort to turn off the dam. It seems like something out of a sci-fi movie. How did the public first react when they found out their beloved Niagara Falls was going to be stopped for a while?
Well, Canadians were okay with it because it wasn't our falls that were going to be stopped. I mean, our falls, and it's always been kind of a bone of contention for the Americans that the Canadian side of the falls are way more spectacular than the American side. Like
they are way better.
by far. So for Canadians, it was like, well, if they want to stop their falls, they can. We still got ours going. But what they were trying to do was they wanted to, those falls had a lot of jagged rocks and things like that. So they really wanted to come in and deal with, I guess, what they saw as a problem. And kind of in the same way as the ice dam preventing the water from going over the falls in 1848, in 1969, they essentially just made a massive rock pile at the base of, or not at the base of the falls, but like up river to prevent the water from coming in. And it took about 3 days to create this coffer dam, and they used about 28,000 tons of rock. So it wasn't easy. And then once that had been put in place, they were able to start dealing with this massive rock pile at the bottom of the falls that was, was a danger through things like the Maid of the Mist and such, because a lot of these rocks were jagged because they had broken off the cliff.
Water causes erosion. I learned that I learned that somewhere. Were the Americans upset their side of the falls were turned off? Were people upset, or were they just kind of enjoying the change of temporary change of scenery?
I think at first they weren't upset because, again, like with the 1848 falls, it provided them with opportunities to kind of see things in a different perspective. And they knew why the falls were not working anymore. And there was less of a danger. You weren't really worried that suddenly the falls were going to start going over again. So people would, they would walk on the riverbed. People would pick up coins that had been thrown in there over the years. Once again, there were a lot of artifacts to choose from. But at the same time, the United States Corps of Engineers, they were actually working to remove all of the rock pile and everything. It took them 5 months to really clear all of this out and deal with the massive amount of rocks that were there before they, essentially turn the falls back.
Anything fun found during that time the falls were shut off?
Not that I was able to find beyond the coins and such. There wasn't a lot of things that were. I feel like this one wasn't as magical as the 1848 one. The 1848 one, it's winter, it's random. This one just seems less magical, but you would pick up things like coins and maybe a few souvenirs. 1969. I mean, if it happened today, you'd probably be picking shopping carts and bikes and who knows what else was thrown into the river.
Do you think we'll ever see a natural stoppage again, maybe in our lifetime, or the falls too protected, too managed, too man-made, and of course, climate change? We're not unlikely to get big piles of ice. You think we'll see it again, or probably not?
I don't think so. Like you said, with climate change, it's harder for it to freeze, first of all. But then we also have dams in place, and they control the water going over. You do have cases where the falls freeze, but again, that's not super common. But to have the falls just stop, unless we did it on purpose like the Americans did in 1969, I don't see it happening. I certainly don't see it happening as some random thing just because of the dams that are in place that kind of control the amount of water going over.
Well, Craig, thanks for walking us through those eerie days, one in 1948 and one in 1969 when the falls stopped flowing. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Check out Craig Baird's podcast, Canadian History X. That's spelled EAXAX. That's the show. Thank you as always for tuning in. If you missed any part of the night, good news. The last show is available as a podcast. You can stream it on demand for any nights you're going to miss, or to play for your great aunt-in-law in Estonia who doesn't get it on the radio. Just head to www.lastshow.pizza. That's lastshow.pizza, not .com. And there you can find details about our podcast and our social media accounts. I'll see you next week on Monday night. I mean, I won't see you because it's audio, but I'm David Cooper, and this was The Last Show.